We're back for another recording of our Pong tutorial. Last tutorial where we left off, you should have a game that is just a basic prototype where we have different things that are working with our game. And if we hit the flag up top here, what we should have right now is a ball that bounces, and we should have a paddle that moves left and right with our left and right arrow keys. And if we miss that ball, it stops when it hits the bottom. Today we're going to spend a bunch of time making the gameplay better, adding points, changing colors, backgrounds, game over screens, you name it, everything we pretty much need to make this game much better as far as the gameplay. So first thing we're going to do is we're simply going to make the game look a little bit better. You should have your code here, and what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the right corner where it says backdrop, and we're going to click on that and we get a backdrop library. What I suggest is you can choose any one of these, doesn't matter which one, just pick one that doesn't interfere with the ball too much color wise. I'm just going to grab something plain simple here like this brick wall, just like that there. And when we put that in place, we get the background, which will stay there as we play our game. So if I hit the flag again, we get the background, which is nicely in place. Right now we got this ball that moves around. The ball's a little bit boring, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to change the appearance of the ball as the game goes. So I'm just going to add a little bit of code here, and in order to add my code, in order to make the ball change appearance, it's fairly straightforward. Essentially, every time we have that ball hit our paddle, we want the ball to change color. We'll just add a little bit to the gameplay. So in order to do that, we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, in our code, we want to find or locate the if touching paddle, because we want to do it right in this particular section. So in the if touching paddle section of our ball, because we know we're on our ball if we've got that icon located right there, we're going to go to looks. And in looks, we're going to bring in something called next costume. And we are going to place it right in here. So what's going to happen is if the ball touches the paddle, it's going to change direction. It's going to next costume. Well, what does next costume mean? Well, because we're on our ball sprite, if we come over here to costumes, we'll notice that our ball has 5 different costumes. It has 5 different colors. So regardless of where the ball is starting, every time it hits the paddle, it'll go to next costume and move to the next one, just down the way. So if we go back to code, and now we have that next costume in place, and we hit play, every time we hit the ball against the paddle, that ball is going to change colors. Just adds a little bit to our gameplay. I'm going to pause the video right here so you can make the changes to both your background and the next paddle. Okay, next that you've got your code in for the next costume, your ball is bouncing around, it's changing colors. We have an issue where when our ball hits the bottom of the screen, our ball just stops. Well, we want to fix that up a bit. What we want to do is we want to make it look like our ball, kind of disappears on us as opposed to just kind of stopping with the game. So we've got an if statement. If we're touching the paddle, we're going to have to add an if statement. We're going to play with the if statement if touching the bottom edge right here. Now, in order to do this, it's going to be fairly straightforward. What we're going to have the ball do is make it look like the ball disappears, and we're going to use the same area here. We're going to have looks, except we're going to come down to this change color effect by. And this change color effect, we're actually not going to change the color effect. We're going to use something in that change color effect. There's multiple effects that we can use in here. So we're going to pull in that change color effect. We've got to put it above the stop all so that things happen before the stop all. And we're actually going to need to bring something else in here. We're going to have to bring in a repeat. So we're going to go to controls and we're going to bring in a repeat 10. And we're going to try to drop the repeat 10 in here. And we're going to take the stop all and move it out, and we're going to bring the chain. Ooh, that didn't work nicely for us. We're going to put there's how we're going to have a look. Now, what's going to happen here is when the ball touches the bottom edge, it's going to loop through this structure 10 times only. So whereas this looping structure loops forever, This looping structure only loops 10 times, so it's got a counter in it, and it quickly counts 10 times. And what we want it to do is we're not going to have it change the color effect. We're going to pull down on this list here, and we're going to have it pixelate right here. We're going to change a pixelate effect by 25 10 times. And what that's going to do is going to make it look like our ball is going to fade out. Now we need this above the stop all, and we need it to repeat 10 times before the stop all, because if it does not repeat 10 times before the stop all, the game will just start to pixelate and end. So this will make it disappear, and when it's done its 10 count, then it will stop everything. So if I run the game right here, and we miss on purpose, the ball hits the bottom, the ball pixelates. Now, the ball comes back and reappears. Well, that's going to be fixable for us. We're going to fix that right about now in order to make it look like the ball stays away forever, because again, we can see that pixelate. In order to have the ball stay away forever, what we're quickly going to do is under looks, once it's done its pixelate and before the stop all, we are going to hide that ball. Now you think, okay, so we go, we run, it hits, the ball hides. Great, ball's hidden, ball looks like it's disappeared. But now we have another problem. If we run the game, the ball doesn't come back. You can see the ball's moving. If we look down here, all these numbers are changing quickly, but the ball doesn't come back. One thing you must keep in mind when you're working with Scratch, everything that you hide, if you want to see it again, you must show. So to guarantee that we always get to see the ball, we're going to take a show block and we're going to put it right at the very top of the code. So every time the game starts, the first thing it does is it shows the ball, then it moves the ball into position. So now when I press the flag, the ball appears. The ball will bounce around. When it hits the bottom, it disappears. Game stops. Game is over. We'll pause right here and let you get that little bit of code in place. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we have a game where we can nicely play. We got a ball that changes colors, we have a ball that bounces, we have a paddle that works. But right now we have a game which is, you're never going to lose unless you're not paying attention, because the game doesn't get any harder. All we have is a bouncy ball. So the next thing we're going to add to this game is we're going to add a change in speed to the game. So every time that ball hits the paddle, the ball is going to speed up. That is going to make our game substantially more difficult. Now to do this, we're going to require variables. And what variables are they are values that we can change at runtime during the game. We can have values that continually change. In order to build our variables, the first thing we have to do is come to the side over here on the left and declare them. So we come to the variables which are orange. We're going to make a new variable. And we can make it for all sprites, which is just fine for now, because we're not going to have a lot of sprites, and we may be able to pass this variable back and forth to some other things later. And we're just going to call this variable something really simple like speed. Once we give it a useful name, we hit OK, and you're going to get this box up in the top left of your screen. We're going to be able to turn that off later, so you don't have to look at that, but we're going to leave it right there now so it works. Now, we want this speed to change every time that the ball hits the paddle. Now, before we can do that, we actually have to set a speed at the beginning of the game, a default speed. So in order to set the defaults for speed right at the top of the game, we're going to bring in this right here, set my variable to, and we're going to just drop it right in here at the top of the game. And we're going to set the speed to 10. So the ball is going to start at 10, and we need to set my variable to speed. So set speed to 10. So right at the very beginning, we're going to set that speed. Now, we want the ball to actually be able to change speeds. So right below that, we have a move 10 steps. Well, that's all fine that we want it to move 10 steps. But we want to make sure that that 10 steps can change. And right now, there's no possible way it can change. So we're going to grab the speed variable from over here, and we're going to drag it into here. So now the ball is going to move speed steps. So whatever speed is, this will move. So right now, speed equals 10. But if I made speed 6 and I run it, the ball moves at speed 6. If I put this at 3 and I restart the game, the ball moves really slow. So it's going to run at whatever the speed steps are. So maybe we'll put the game at, so we'll put it back at 10. So now the ball starts at regular speed for us. But now how are we going to get that to change when the ball hits the paddle? Well, again, we're going to put some code if touching paddle, because we only want the speed to change if it's touching the paddle. And this is really, really simple. We want the ball to, when it touches the paddle, to change the direction. We want it to change next costume. But what we can also do is we're going to bring this change my variable by 1, and we're going to put it right in here. And it's going to change speed by 1. Now when I hit this to play, every time we hit, you'll be able to watch that speed variable move up. And as you play, the game will get more difficult because that ball will be moving faster and faster. Eventually, the ball will get going super fast and it'll be really tough for you to hit the ball. And here we go. It just keeps moving faster and faster. I'm going to let mine go there. Now, we see this works. This counts up. The ball moves faster. So now the game is getting a little more difficult to play. But we don't need to see that speed up there anymore. So we can do two things to it. We can hide the variable, or we can just come over here in the variables tab, and there's a little check mark next to it, and we can turn that off. That's only turning off the visibility. It's not turning off the functionality. I'll pause for a few seconds here while you get your proper code in place. The next bit of code we're going to add is going to be very similar to adding the speed. We're going to add score because you're going to want to keep track of how many hits you actually have. And making a score variable is exactly the same way as making a speed variable. We're just going to start it at a different number. Instead of starting it at 10, we're going to start the score variable down at 0. So to get a score variable in place, we'll do a make a variable right here. We'll call it score. We'll hit OK. That score variable will show up in the corner, and you can move that variable anywhere you like. If you don't like it in the left corner and you want it in the center, put it there. If you want it in the right, you can put it over there. It doesn't really matter where you put that particular variable. So we've got the score variable, and of course, every time you start the game, you want that score variable to start at 0. So we'll just bring a set score to 0. And then this score is going to change exactly the same way that the speed changes. So we're going to go change my variable, instead of speed, score by 1. And we can change it by anything we want. If you wanted 5 points for every hit, it doesn't matter. We're just going to leave it up to count by 1. So now when we play the game, every time you hit that score, that variable changes. It keeps track of your score. It keeps track of your hits. I'll pause here and give you a few seconds in order to get your appropriate code in place. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a game over screen for this particular game. When the ball hits the bottom of the screen, instead of just having the ball disappear, it would be nice to indicate that the game's over. It would be nice to change background so people know the game's over. So we're going to add a couple of different things to this game. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a new sprite called a game over sprite. It's going to be a text-based sprite that we're just going to have show up each time that the game is over. So in order to build this, we're going to come to paint a sprite. And I'm going to give that sprite a name. I'm going to call that game over. So that's going to be the name. Actually, that's the name of the costume. I need to come down here to the sprite and call it game over. Doesn't matter if we left the costume. It's exactly the same thing. And then we're going to choose a color for your sprite. I'm going to make mine very, very saturated yellow. It might be a little tough to see on this part of the screen, but when we got it done, it'll show up nicely over here. And then I'm just going to grab some text, and I'm just going to click here, and I'm going to write game over. A little tough to see there, but when I click off of it, you'll notice it shows up really good here. And I'm going to then align it close to center, just like we did the last one. I'm going to make 2 lines here. I'm going to add some more text just below it, and I will put in Click flag to play again. Make sure I spell that right. Click flag to play again, and I will nicely kind of align that as well. So I've got some text in there, and I'm just going to try to center that, sort of like that, so the two things are kind of close together. And then I've got my game over sprite. Now my game over sprite will automatically be shown. You'll notice right now that it is on the screen. It is not centered, so I'm just going to make sure I set it at 0, 0. So there's my game over sprite. I'll pause right here for you to finish your game over sprite before we continue on with the rest of the tutorial. All right, hopefully you've got your game over sprite built and it's sitting in the middle of the stage. If it's not sitting in the middle of the stage, that's okay. We'll position it. Now, when you press play, you're going to see that game over sprite because it's automatically visible when we start. So what we're going to want to do is when the game starts, we're going to want to hide that sprite. So in order to make sure that that sprite goes away when the game starts, we're going to go into control. Sorry, not controls. We're going to go into events. And we're going to grab a when clicked. And we're going to go into looks. And we're going to bring in a hide. Now once we do that and we press play, that hides. Now when the game's over, it doesn't come back yet because we haven't told it to come back yet. Now to get it to come back is going to be a rather interesting thing. We're going to use a special command called a broadcast. And what a broadcast does is it goes and asks sprites to do things when certain events are triggered. And we're going to need to do that from the ball. So let's go to the ball. And the broadcast is basically going to be a message that we send out. And it's going to be located near the bottom here, and if touching bottom edge. So we only want to see the game over when the ball has touched the bottom edge. So I'm going to show you how we nicely do that. We are going to go to control. No, it's going to be under events, I think. I think it's under events. Here we go. We're going to bring in a broadcast message 1. And we're going to bring that in right around. We can put it above or below the hide. It doesn't matter. We're going to bring in a broadcast message 1. And when we pull down message 1, we're going to go new message. And what we're going to broadcast is game over. So this is going to be the message that we're going to send out. So essentially what's going to happen here is if the ball touches the bottom edge, it's going to repeat 10 times, pixelate out, it's going to hide the ball, and then the game is going to basically send a message out to every sprite, and it's going to send the message out that this game is over. And it's going to do that before the stop all. So this game's over. Now, all the other sprites are kind of listening for broadcasts. They're listening for messages to be sent to them. And the only one we actually need to pay attention to this is our game over sprite. So I'm going to click on the game over sprite, and we're going to have the game over sprite. We're going to add some code to it so it will react to the message game over when it receives it. So we're going to put here that when I receive game over, we are going to then go to looks, and we are going to show the game over sprite. So the game over sprite, when the game starts, will hide and then do nothing until it receives that game over message. So when the ball hits the bottom, a game over message goes out. When this hears that there's a game over message, it will show the sprite. So here we go. I will now miss on purpose, sends the message, the game over sprite shows up. I'm going to stop this video here. You can get your proper code in place, and I'll make another video for the next sections that we need. Welcome back to our Pong game tutorials. What we're going to be working on in this tutorial is making sure that our game over screen works a little better, that we'll change backgrounds in our game over screen. We will have a look at defining whether or not the player has reached a high score. And with that, we're going to make another sprite that will denote whether or not there's a high score or not. In our next video after this one, I'll show everybody how to insert sounds into their game. So the first bit that we're going to be working on is just changing a little bit more with our game over, so that when the game is over, that it'll change the background for us. Because right now, when we play our little game, we got a ball that moves, it hits a paddle, it hits the top, it bounces off the sides. When we miss, we get a game over that comes up and our ball disappears. So what we would like to do is also, when a game over happens, we're going to switch backdrops. So we're going to come to the bottom right side of the screen and we're going to select a second backdrop. So pick something a little bit different. I'm going to see if I can find just basic stars like that there. That's going to be a second backdrop. So if I come to costumes here, actually not costumes here, I should have two backdrops now. Is it going to let me see all my different backdrops? There we go. If I click on the backdrop and I go to backdrops, I should have multiple backdrops. I got backdrop 1, which is empty, wall, and stars. So I'm actually going to click on this backdrop 1, and if I right click on it, it's going to let me delete it right there. So I only have two backdrops, wall and stars. Now, whichever one I have clicked on is the one which is going to be the default backdrop. So if I have wall clicked, that'll be the one that plays. If I have stars clicked, that'll be the one that plays. So even when I hit the flag here, whichever one was active is going to be the backdrop which shows up. And we want to be able to control which backdrop shows up. When I play this game, I want my wall to show up when the game plays, and I only want my stars to show up when the game is over. So to do that, we're going to come back to the ball, and we're going to go back to the code window. So we got the ball in the code window. And what we're going to do to make sure that it always plays with the ball, the brick wall background, is under looks, you will see that there is a switch backdrop to. So whenever the game starts, we're going to show the ball, we're going to switch the backdrop to, and my wall 1 backdrop, which is my brick wall backdrop. So when I play the game now, I get my brick wall backdrop. Now, when the game is over, I want to change the backdrop to something else, and we want it to be able to do it really, really quickly. So we're going to do that on the ball as well. So all we're going to do is move down towards the bottom of this code. You may be able to see all the code on your screen. And we've got a number of things going on here. If touching bottom edge, we're going to repeat 10 times pixelate. We're going to hide. We're going to do those kinds of things. And what I am going to do is, just as the ball is being hidden, we're going to switch the backdrop to stars backdrop, and then it will also broadcast the game over. So the way it's going to look now is this. I can play. It's got my 1 background. If I miss, boom, game over. I get a different background. My game over sprite shows up. And when I play the ball again, here we are, we get my brick wall again. That's how we quickly change backgrounds from one to another during gameplay. We're going to add a little bit more to this in a little bit once we start working on a high score. Now, next bit is going to be the high score, and determining on whether or not we have a high score. And determining on whether or not we have a high score is going to require a couple of different things from us. It's going to require a variable. It's going to require a little math for the variable, which is going to be fairly straightforward, which I'll explain to you. And then it's going to require some changing down here for our game overs, because we're going to have 2 different game over sprites. We're going to have a game over that congratulates you for having the high score, and just a game over screen for just plain game ending, but you not getting the high score. So the first thing we need to do is build ourselves a high score variable so we can keep track of high scores. So we're going to go to control. Sorry, not control. We're going to go to variables. My apologies. We're going to make a new variable. And this variable, we're just going to call high score. Fairly straightforward. So now we have a high score variable. It's going to sit over here for now. Now the high score variable, we do not want to set to 0 right every time we play the game, because if so, the high score would reset itself every time it plays. The fact that the high score variable exists, the very first time you play the game, it'll be 0. We want it to be able to store the value for that, so we're not going to reset it here at the beginning. And we're going to treat the high score a little bit to work on its own. So we're going to add some code. We're going to add a separate when clicked code off to the side of your main code block. So we're going to go to events, and we're going to go when clicked. So this is where we are going to set the value of our high score. So once we're in here, I'm going to go into control. We're going to bring in a forever loop, something that we're going to use quite often in the different games that we build. And then we're also going to bring in an if loop, or an if-then decision structure, sorry. And now we need to do a little bit of math. How are we going to know we have our high score? Well, we know the high score starts at 0 the very first game. And say you got 10 points. How are you going to determine that the high score changes if a player gets more than 10 points? And it's a simple mathematical formula. So we're going to come to operators, and we are going to grab a greater than sign, which is this one here. Don't worry that it says 50 in here. We're going to be changing that. Now, the next thing we're going to grab to put in here is we're going to come to the variables. We're going to bring score, and we're going to drop it right there. And they're going to grab the variable high score, and we're going to drop it right in there. So this says forever if a score is greater than the high score. So say the score was at 10. The last person who played got 10 points. So if the score is greater than high score, so if the new person playing gets 11, right, that will be greater than high score. So what are we going to do then? Well, we are going to then set the high score to the new score. So if the high score was 10 and you're playing along and you have 15, your score is greater than high score. So the high score will be set to what your score is, which is 15. So it's a quick mathematical formula here in a quick logic statement to basically saying the high score will only be changed if the score is greater than the high score. So the first time the game plays, the high score is 0. So we'll just play this. Now, we haven't actually, we set it out, yeah, this should work. So if I play this here, there we go. 1, 2, because the score is greater than the high score right now. I'm just going to get this to 5, so now I can die. All right, so the game played. High score and score are equal, and that makes sense that high score and score are the same because it was the first time the game played. Now watch what happens. When I play the game, high score should stay at 5, and score should go to 0. And now when I play, see how the high score doesn't change because the score is not greater than high score. If I die, the high score stayed at 5. If I play again, and this time get higher than 5 hits or higher than 5 points, that high score should start changing. There we go, because now the score, every time it goes, is greater than high score. Okay, that works. That's good. Now, another thing is we don't actually necessarily need to see the high score every time. You only really need to see the high score if you get the high score. You can leave it on if you want. I'm going to show you a way where I'm going to turn it off and only bring it on when the high score is actually gotten, or show it at the end of the game. But what we're going to also end up having is 2 different game over screens. We're going to have a game over screen, which is just a plain game over, and we'll have a game over screen that congratulates the person for having a high score. So to make my new sprite, which is going to congratulate people for getting a high score, I'm going to make a new sprite, but instead of making it just from new, I'm going to right click on my game over sprite down here, and I'm going to duplicate it. And instead of leaving it called game over 2, I'm going to call it high score and hit enter. Now when I go to the costumes for this, it looks exactly the same as my other one. The only thing that I'm going to do is add a new line of text that says, congratulations, high score, exclamation point. And then I'll just hit enter on that. Oops. I'll just click off of that. How come it's not letting me click off? There we go. And then I can take this and center it nicely in the middle. And now I have a high score sprite. Now it's not going to show on screen right away because we already have some code in there. Whenever you duplicate a sprite, it it brings the code along with it. So if I just click on the show here, we'll see that it shows up. It's off to the side, and there's two ways you can make sure that's in the center each time you run it. You can either center it here on the X and Y's, or you can go to a motion and you can automatically set it to go to 0, 0. Actually, we can set it to go to 0, 0 each time it shows up. Yeah, let's do that. And if I just click on this code, it'll show up and it'll go to 0. Congratulations, high score. All right, so that's a different sprite. Now, that sprite right now is showing up when it receives game over. Well, we don't want it to show up just when game over is received, because if that happens, game's over, you don't have the high score, and you just get the high score to show up. We don't want that. So we're going to have it listen for a new message. We haven't made the new message yet, but we'll have it listen for a new message, and we'll have it listen for the high score message. So right now, when we lose the game, if we do not have the high score, we just get game over, and the high score doesn't show up. And actually right now, the way we have it coded, the high score will never show up because we haven't broadcast a high score message yet. So to broadcast that high score message, we're going to come back to the ball, and we're going to make a number of changes back down here at the bottom in this if bottom edge. We're going to make a number of changes. So we're going to leave a couple of things here. We're going to take some parts out. We're basically going to take this switch backdrop to stars out. We're going to take the game over out, and we are going to tuck the stop all right back in under the hide. So we're going to leave these out for now. We're going to need to bring in a new control structure, one that we haven't used yet. We're going to bring in an if then else, and an if then else allows us to make multiple decisions in here. You'll see how it works. We're just going to come and plug it right in below the hide. Now that stop all is not in a good place. That stop all on my screen needs to be pulled out, and that stop all needs to go right here below the if then else. If it's not below this if then else, it's going to stop your game prematurely and nothing is going to run. So please be very careful in making sure that it is in the right spot. Now we're going to throw a logic statement in here, and we're going to go back to our mathematical operators, and we're going to bring in an equal sign, and we're going to throw an equals right into there. So what we're going to check out is we're going to know we have the high score now if, let's go to our variables, if our score equals our high score. So if the two of them are changing at the same time, and when the game over, the high score matches the score, we know we have a high score. And we're now going to go to looks. We're going to switch the backdrop to stars, the same as before. We are going to bring in a broadcast. But instead of broadcasting game over, we're going to have it broadcast high score. Oops, that's not what I wanted. And I got that right back where I needed it. I'm working with a little less room than some of you are. And so that will work nicely there. And then we'll take this bottom part and throw it right into the else. So switch backdrop to stars, broadcast game over. So if score equals high score, broadcast high score, else just broadcast game over. And that will give us our different sprites. So if we play this now, and now I lose, I just get that. Now, I would have to play all the way to 13 if I wanted to, in order to check to see if my high score is going to work, but I'm going to cheat. And as a developer, you get to cheat on these kinds of things. So I'm just going to go to variables. I'm going to bring a set high score to 0 in, but I'm not going to attach it to anything. So if it's not attached into any of the when clicked flag events, it will not affect the game when the game plays. But if I bring it into here and just click it, it sets the high score down to 0 because I've got it set here at a set high score to 0. So as a developer, you can cheat a little bit and reset your high scores. So now the high score equals the score, If I lose, I get my congratulations, high score. And if I play and I lose and don't get the high score, I don't get the high score. So I'll pause right here. I'll let you get that code in place, and then we'll come in and actually, I think I'll stop the whole video right here, because the last thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to put in sounds. And that'll be in our next little video.